The longest ever press marathon given by any president had taken place here in Kyiv, just some kilometers from, not far from Hromadske studio. That was by President Zelenskyy, who for 14 hours in a row was answering the question of more than 300 journalists. And we have with us our colleagues who had been there. That's Roth, who is the Moscow correspondent from The Guardian, and Anna Myroniuk, who is a staff writer from Kyiv Post, our great colleagues explaining also Ukraine in English. And of course, and I understand that as an American reporter working for the British paper, your interest is all about the story about the Trump and Zelenskyy, everything about after that. But we want to give let us know, how did you see, what is your impression, what did you find out coming here to being present at this event?
I mean, for me, coming in for the event, you knew that it was going to be something unusual or kind of unorthodox. It was almost, I guess, a little bit of a circus, for 14 hours, kind of people gathering in this food court in downtown Kiev. And I mean, part of the idea was really to create this kind of spectacle of transparency. So going in, you came in with kind of a grain of salt and you understood that it's sort of a show. On the other hand, I mean, you do have to say that physically it's impressive, and it's good that there was an opportunity, at least for journalists, to directly ask questions to Mr. Zelenskyy. That's one of the first chances that a lot of journalists have had to do that.
And as a Kyiv-based reporter, were your question covered? You've asked the brilliant questions on the mayor of Odessa, who, according to the investigation also done by Hromadske investigative units, leads to had a Russian passport and all about criminal situation there. But were you satisfied with the answers and all other answers?
Well, it's tricky because my opinion is that Zelenskyy had a problem with addressing questions, obviously, sometimes, because sometimes he trying to be transparent, trying to be nice, trying to be perceived as a nice guy who is willing to answer, to be transparent and open. Sometimes he was even aggressive and also, I would say, even rude, because, for example, some journalists, I didn't experience that myself, because he addressed my question with problems. I'll tell about this later, but other journalists had a difficulty with him when he was attacking them with, for example, saying, well, try to walk in my shoes. I didn't even have time to do haircut because I'm so hardworking president, and well, why are you asking me, because I'm that busy and I'm that tired of everything and stuff. So I think the problem is that he didn't want to answer certain questions, and instead he was asking journalists. So for example, he was asked a question and he didn't know how to answer, so he would say, well, I want to ask you a question instead. And I think that is kind of distracting for people. He was trying to win time, I think. While he's asking a journalist a question, he can think about what to answer on the question asked. My question he addressed, and he said that he's not a friend of a mayor of Odessa, Gennady Trukhanov. He said that they don't have any relationship but working relationship. And I think that, again, I needed to ask him twice about whether they discussed corruption, because he admitted that they met at Bankova. And he tried to avoid my question on whether they discussed corruption. So yes, as I said, I needed to ask him twice. So he finally said that they discussed everything. So that was the answer.
Andrew, and you were in the very end of the line, and you also were talking about Trump, and I guess that was a question which had been repeated for many times.
Right. I mean, that was a topic that, most of the American reporters who are here in Kiev right now are very focused on that, and other foreign reporters too, because in the United States, that's the biggest topic right now. The topic had been brought up, but the thing about discussing that with him is that, there's a difference between having, a 14-hour press conference and really being ready to engage with every question that you're given. And I think that in terms of, discussing Giuliani, the phone call with Trump, etc., that was a topic he did not really want to discuss. that much. I mean, that had a kind of set answer.
I would have to clarify, everybody who'd been in this studio or talking to us from DC had given like the only advice to Zelenskyy is like no comment on this topic, because anything he may say would be bad for Ukraine and can't be considered partisan. So how do you think that in the end, out of the all answers of the foreign reporters about this, what we have in the end, like the final, how do you understand his position?
I mean, I think that exactly is his position. It's basically to avoid any kind of controversy on that. It's funny, there were so many foreign reporters here, but I really think that this press conference was more about addressing his problems at home. It's for the last couple of weeks, there has been a lot of criticism about him, and there has been, a couple of, I guess, like bad news weeks for Zelenskyy outside of the call with Trump. Between the IMF and this, basically stalling of the IMF, looking at Kolomoisky and Privatbank, looking at the Steinmeier formula and some of the response to that, and also the fact that a lot of people see him as not the most open president to the press. So he was really trying to address that problem with this press conference, and that's what he was focused on.
So how about the other questions? Of course, we think like the same as the question of Trump for dozens of time. There was a question asked about the Normandy Forum, about the negotiation with Russia in different format. So where you think, what we understand as a society after that?
I think I totally agree with Andrew. I think the problem is that he wanted us to know that he is somewhere in the middle. He stands in between of yes and no. So that's basically what he was saying. I think everything he said can be interpreted in different ways. So it's a matter of how you perceive these things. So I think he was indefinite in everything he was saying, and that is his problem, because we didn't, as a society, as a journalist myself, I didn't get what he wanted to say in many instances.
Right, if you read, foreign press reports too about what he was doing, there's no line. There's no single idea that all the sort of reporters kind of caught on to. There's no lead really about what this press conference was about, right? What was the most important line? Because for me, it's kind of difficult to say what news he made in 14 hours.
So we get a lot of news, but for instance, in our case, it was quite obvious that he was very, very strong on the humanitarian part of the Donbass, as like having it as a strategy to end the war. Which was also very, let's say, before, especially within the last weeks, there were some of the protests against any kind of resolution with Russia, and he was just begging this idea that there is no way, rather than we do some concessions.
Right, that's important, of course, understanding his approach to the war and how important that is for his administration. He said that in the first, I think, hour, right, or even in the first 15 minutes of the press conference. That was the main line that he wanted to get out. But in terms of hard facts of what has changed, what more we know basically about the Steinmeier formula, or about humanitarian actions in East Ukraine, or about a bunch of other issues about Kolomoisky. I think that was not completely addressed in the press conference, and it left a lot of questions, despite the fact that he was sitting there with many journalists for 14 hours.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think 14 hours, and we don't have certain answers on plenty of questions.
Which are, for instance, because I've heard all 14. I've heard every single answer, got quite a clarity on some of them. Not some vague answers were, but some were quite clear. At least you understand where the guy stands.
Well, for example, Kolomoisky case, I think it's interesting because he was, in the very beginning, he said something like, we need to negotiate, and I would have if the society gave me a chance to do so, because when I posted this photograph, when I'm sitting at Bankova with Kolomoisky and the team, everybody got, furious and started criticizing me. So he was like, the society doesn't allow me to hold these negotiations with Kolomoisky, and I would have if I had a chance. That was his first opinion. And then he said something completely different, saying like, well, we shouldn't pay any money to Kolomoisky back after nationalization of Privatbank. So I don't really get, does he want to negotiate with Kolomoisky, or does he want to, he also said something like, I don't put any pressure on the courts, and I will call the judge or something like that only in the interest of Ukraine. It is also quite a tricky phrase, in the interest of Ukraine. Everything can be in the interest of Ukraine. It's like very, again, it's a matter of how you perceive this. phrases.
Right. If he said I'd be acting not in the interest of Ukraine, that would be quite surprising. So, what else can he say?
I would probably mention one remark. We had a short video, which we even didn't mention, I guess, for us. It was not that outstanding out of the whole conference of the press marathon, but some of our LGBT activists pointed out some particular moment we would like to show, because there were some people coming to the place and yelling. So what we've been pointed out, that it was the first time the Ukrainian president openly defended LGBT, and we have this short clip which was on the, let's say, margins of this press conference.
Почему вы не дали ответ епископам и всем нам, что остановите вы программу комитета 300 Сороса по распространению проклятия разврата гомосексуализма? Остановите ли вы легализацию проституции, аборты? Или вы будете продолжать курс Порошенко, шестерки Сороса и комитета 300?
Я не знаю пана Сороса, не є його шестіркою. Тому я не можу продовжувати робити його працю, тому що я до його праці не маю ніякого відношення. Я не займаюся легалізацією проституції, чого в країні немає. Легалізація будь-чого в країні може бути тільки через законодавство України, через зміну законодавства. Це значить через Верховну Раду України, через прийняття закону. Про людей з нетрадиційною орієнтацією не хочу вам нічого поганого зараз говорити, тому що ми живемо з вами в відкритому, вільному суспільстві, де кожен обирає мову, якою спілкується, національність і свою орієнтацію. Залиште ви вже цих людей в спокій, Господи.
But I guess let's move to the different, because the marathon was just some kind of the opportunity to ask. The story you probably working, first of all, this is the Ukraine-US relations after the scandal, after the everything we got to know with this quid pro quo deal, which hadn't happened. So while being here, what do you think is at this stage is the most important in the case of Trump and Zelenskyy?
I think to me, it depends on whose perspective you're looking from, really. I believe, personally, as somebody working in Kyiv right now, that this is mostly a story about Washington and the way that Washington, D.C. works. We're talking about American politicians or people connected with them coming out, and the way that they can kind of make money using their name or power, and the way that there are some Ukrainian businessmen who are willing to pay for that. I think that in terms of the Ukrainian side, I think what's most important is it's the kind of first test for Zelensky's team, and to see a little bit from the inside about how they managed to deal with one of the most difficult situations that you can imagine as the new president of Ukraine. You're dealing with hostile power in Russia. You need U.S. backing, and you can't anger the president, but you also have to worry about the elections coming up. And to my mind, I think that we should be impressed to a certain degree with how the Zelenskyy team has handled itself. Not all the information has come out, but they're balancing on a very kind of difficult situation, and from the transcripts that we've seen from the telephone call and the way the case is moving, we've seen them kind of stand their ground so far. So I think that that's most important to me from the Ukrainian point of view.
And this week also, just this Friday, the former ambassador to the US to Ukraine had given a written testimony to the Congress, Maria Yovanovitch, who had been awkwardly pulled out just few weeks before she had to end her term. You've been working also here. I guess we read this testimony, and I think we're not repeating it because there is nothing mind-blowing there. Just apart from openly, there was a good diplomat who tried to protect, to work for the state. But what do you think? It also brings to the table, her testimony, and also how do you think that? What did you find yourself in this transcript?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that her testimony was anyhow revealing or bringing some kind of, explosive information regarding Trump and this scandal involving the Bidens and Burisma and so-called alleged intervening of Ukraine into 2016 elections. I think everything she said we kind of knew before. I mean, journalists probably.
Journalists based here in particular.
Based here,
yeah.
probably. That's why, to me, it didn't kind of ring a bell that, well, that is something that I didn't know. So, I don't know, to me, the whole situation is quite difficult, and I agree with Andrew that I think Zelenskyy is standing on a sick ice, and if he makes wrong move, that can be critical in this condition and in this situation.
What also his testimony is adding to the story?
Yovanovitch's testimony. I mean, what's important to me in that testimony is, one, I still think, despite us knowing this, it's still the fact itself of a former ambassador to Ukraine standing up and saying that this is, how the embassy and how the State Department was working is important. And two, I think, was one line in it when she said she went back to Washington, D.C. and said that the Deputy Secretary of State told her there was a concerted campaign against you. To me, that begs the question, what concerted campaign? And can that person tell us more about it? The person who said that to her is now the nominee for the ambassadorship to Moscow. So this is a person who's going to be in this part of the world coming up. And, to my mind, it moved, I agree that it didn't move forward the story too much, but I think the spectacle of it was important.
So to finalize, I would say, like, as a foreign reporter, with having Ukraine in the US headlines all the time, but just like the name, somewhere, what are the things for you are the most important to know here still? What we still have to, investigate, find out, ask people here, or you think it's still what we can investigate in Ukraine?
No, I mean, I think the most important thing is there's a lot of information about how this happened that we don't know about yet. The difference between the Ukrainian leadership and the American leadership right now is actually that Zelenskyy's team has very good discipline in terms of what they're talking about or not talking about in general.
It's strange to hear.
It is very strange to hear, and it's unusual situation, but there's about maybe 10 or 15 people who can really put you in the room or tell you about these conversations that took place between Yermak or Bakanov from the SPU, or Bogdan, of course, or Shafir. And the most important thing is to try to get their side of the story somehow and to figure out, because they can fill in a lot of details or at least confirm what US officials are saying. So that's the most important thing. How to do it, that's another question.